Lizzie Borden, page 161. Day 1, Monday, June 5th, 1893. From behind the New Bedford courthouse came the hum and click of a dozen trembling telegraph instruments. The entire country panted for news, and so the horse shed had been converted into headquarters for the telegraph operators. There was a floor now, and partitions to make 3 small rooms, one for the Postal Telegraph Cable Company, one for Western Union, and one shared by the Evening Standard and the Associated Press. Inside the courthouse, 25 reporters bent like schoolboys over their notepads. Sheriff Wright had personally numbered each set in the press box and presented tickets to select newspapers. 12 went to the Fall River and New Bedford dailies, 2 to nearby Attleboro and Taunton, and 4 to the Associated Press. The rest went to Boston's 5 most predominant papers. At the last minute, the prisoner's dock had been hastily divided in half to squeeze in 6 more reporters from the York papers. Every other member of the press would have to vie for a seat in the spectators' bench like anyone else. But today no spectators had been admitted. There was no room. 150 men had been called as potential jurors, and they filled every seat. Not one of them was from Fall River. The only glimpse within the New Bedford courthouse that first day would come via the newspapermen, and they were determined not to let their readers miss a thing. Even before the proceedings opened, the telegraphs clattered with descriptions of the room itself, the drab walls trimmed with white, the carpeted floor liberally scattered with spittoons, the scent of wisteria and magnolia seeping in through the windows, along with the sound of a cow mooing loudly in a nearby field. 2 bunches of carnations, one pink and one red, sat on the judge's bench before the 3 white-bearded justices, Chief Justice Albert Mason and his associates Caleb Blodgett and Justin Dewey. Between them, the 3 men had amassed a total of 99 years' experience with the law. At 11 o'clock on the dot, in came the accused. Those who saw Miss Borden for the first time were very much astonished. The Boston Globe noted her newspaper portraits have done her no justice at all. They had expected a monster, a virtual Medusa, with hair of serpents and a gaze of stone. Instead, a shockingly ordinary New England spinster walked across the room and sat down in the prisoner's dock, seemingly unaffected by the hundreds of stares that greeted her. Even the most seasoned journalists were surprised. It has been said again and again that this maiden prisoner is a great, strong woman capable of extraordinary physical exertion, said the famous Julian Ruff of the New York Sun. It is not so. She is very little, if anything, above average stature of a woman. She is not of large build. She does not look to weigh more than 135 pounds at the outside, and if her arms, which cannot be seen in her puffed sleeves, are large and muscular, they assuredly terminate in very small and ladylike hands. Some have made her out hard and hideous fright, the Globe observed, and others have flattered her. Suddenly, it did not matter how many times she had been described before. Hardly a reporter in the room could resist the opportunity to do it yet again. They assessed every inch of her, from the blue feather in her black hat right down to her common-sense, broad-toed band new shoes, noting when she wiped the perspiration from her face or bit nervously at her fan. And yet, with the woman sitting before them with nothing to do but look her over while the lawyers consumed the entire day selecting a jury, the paper still could not fully agree on Lizzie Borden's appearance. Her dress was black, trimmed with bands of velvet ribbon at the hem and cuffs, but whether it was brocade, mohair, or merino cut in the latest style, or of very old fashion depended entirely on whether the information came out of the Boston or New Bedford. A large enamel pin in the shape of a pansy nestled at her throat. One reporter thought it modest, another rather loud. The Boston Globe, still feeling the sting of the trickery McHenry debacle, tended to be complimentary whenever possible. Her dress fitted her as perfectly as if she had been measured for it in Paris, it said. She had been measured, not in Paris, but in Taunton jail. 10 months with little exercise to counteract the many boxes of sweets sent from well-meaning friends meant that a seamstress had to be called in to let out some of Lizzie's dresses for the trial. Other papers were not inclined to be so courteous. They discussed her face as though they were measuring it for wallpaper, with talk of perpendicular lines dropped from the point to that, the distance between the bridge and the tip of her nose, whether her forehead protruded more than her chin. That chin was obstinate and stubborn, proclaimed Joe Joe Howard of the Boston Globe, one of the most famous journalists of the day. The lips were too thick, the eyes set too wide apart, the cheekbones too high, yet the cheeks themselves too full and heavy. The problem was simple. Those who believed her guilty needed Lizzie Borden to look the part of a coarse and brutish killer. Those who favored her innocence required a dainty, delicate lady. Lizzie Borden was neither. She was only herself, and as everyone had come to expect, her outward appearance gave little indication of the personality within. Day 2, Tuesday, June 6, 1893. Mr. Moody, the young district attorney from Essex County, rose from the prosecutor's table and approached the rail of the jury box. 12 gray-faced men looked back at him. With his blond hair, bright blue eyes, and trim mustache, Moody looked like a boy compared with the dozen bearded, balding jurors. This was William Moody's first murder case, and it had fallen to him to open the trial of the century. The jury: George Potter Farmer, age 54, Westport; William F. Dean Farmer, age 54, Taunton; John Wilbur Farmer, housewright and surveyor, age 60, Somerset; Frederick C. Wilbur, cabinet maker, age 36, Raynham; Lemuel K. Wilbur Farmer, age 56, Easton; William Westcott Farmer, age 48, Seekonk; Louis B. Hodges, iron molder, age 59, Taunton; August Swift, manufacturer, age 42, New Bedford; Francis G. Cole, jeweler, age 49, Attleboro; John C. Finn, painter, age 35, Taunton; Charles I. Richards, real estate and town assessor, age 64, North Attleboro, elected foreman; Allen H. Wardell, agriculture retailer, age 45, Dartmouth. The moment he began to speak, Lizzie's eyes snapped toward him. Lizzie Borden, who had spent her courtroom hours staring fixedly at the carpet or the corner of the desk, suddenly followed Mr. Moody with as much interest as much of the 100-odd spectators behind her. He spoke, as he promised the jury, in the plainest, simplest, and most direct manner, doing his best not to overburden them with details that were bound to come out in the evidence. Even so, Moody took the better part of 2 hours to outline the government's case. Much of what he told the jurors was old news to anyone who had been following the case. The indication of an unkindly feeling between Lizzie and Abby Borden, the Bordens' Tuesday night illness, Miss Borden's fears of poisoning, Ellie Bence's claim that Lizzie had tried to buy prussic acid Wednesday morning, and Lizzie's worrisome Wednesday night visit with Alice Russell. He guided them through the layout of the house and the movements of the family, from the locking of the doors Wednesday night to the discovery of the bodies Thursday morning. He covered Lizzie's wavering alibi, the note from Miss Borden's sick friend that had never materialized, and the confounding results of Professor Wood's examinations. Meanwhile, the mercury climbed steadily towards 93 degrees until even the judges had trouble keeping their eyes open. Then Moody said, on the morning of Sunday, Miss Russell came into the kitchen, and the courtroom perked up with interest. At last, the burning of the dress. It was a dress which the prisoner had purchased in the spring of the year, a cotton dress and not a silk dress like this. Moody held up a dark blue dress for the jury to see, then tossed it down to the table. As he did, a flutter of tissue paper at the top of a nearby handbag caught Lizzie Borden's eye. Beneath it, she glimpsed the crowns of her parents' bald, bleached skulls. Up went her big black fan, hiding her flushed face from the court, and there it stayed, while Moody riveted the cord with Alice Russell's revelation, and then an exhibition of the handless hatchet. The Commonwealth will prove that there was an unkindly feeling between the prisoner and her stepmother, Moody declared as he drew to close. Then upon Wednesday, August 3rd, she was dwelling upon murder and preparing herself with a weapon which had no innocent use. That upon the evening of Wednesday, August 3rd, she was predicting disaster and cataloging defenses. No one but the prisoner, Moody said, was in the house from the time Miss Borden went upstairs to change the pillow slips until Lizzie came downstairs an hour later. No other human being could have done it, Moody told the jury, because it could not be done without intimate knowledge of the inside of the house and the habits of the family. We shall prove that the prisoner made contradictory statements about her whereabouts, and, above all, gave a statement vitally different upon the manner in which she discovered these homicides. We shall prove beyond all reasonable doubt that this death, Miss Borden's, was a prior death. Then we shall ask you to say, if you can, whether any other reasonable hypotheses except of a guilt of this prisoner can account for the sad occurrences which happened upon the morning of August 4th. Moody was done. There was no applause, just a patient wondering. What would come next? No one could have guessed. For 2 days, Lizzie Borden had sat, the Boston Globe said, like a graven image, hardly moving except to wave her Japanese fan and rest her head on the rail behind her. Now someone noticed. The fan and the arm that held it up dropped upon the prisoner's lap. Her head was back against the rail, her eyes were shut, her mouth was open, and her breast heaved very long breaths. Lizzie Borden's asleep, was the whisper that galloped through the courtroom. The sheriff gently shook her arm. He might as well have shaken a pump handle, the Globe remarked. Her head lolled, her face went purplish. Lizzie Borden was not asleep. She was unconscious. The hot and drowsy courtroom sprang to life. Someone sat her up. Reverend Jubb fanned her. The deputy sheriff brought a glass of water. Lizzie seemed to half come to, and Reverend Jubb demanding her smelling salts. Her hand went into her pocket mechanically and came out with a little cut glass bottle in it. Then she put both hands on the arm of her chair and fell back against the railing, not half over her faint. Finally, she had done what a woman under intense strain was supposed to do. Lizzie Borden, the sphinx of coolness, who has so often accused of never manifesting a feminine feeling, had fainted, marveled the Fall River Globe. Day 3, Wednesday, June 7th, 1893. Overnight, Lizzie Borden had become human. Since her fainting yesterday, she's regarded as being full of startling possibilities, said the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. Women of all ages, from society matrons to work girls in calico, abandoned their children and their jobs for the day to come watch her. Valentines and daisies, the press soon dubbed the female spectators. To many, the third day felt like the first real day of the trial. Today, there would be nothing but testimony. The mood in court was high. A northeast wind had broken the oppressive heat. Even Lizzie Borden seemed in high spirits. Today she held her head up, looking at everything out of bright eyes, moved her chair about and shifted herself in it quite like anyone else. But in a courtroom, as the Valentines and Daisy soon found out, is a mostly boring place. The first witness, surveyor Thomas Kiernan, sounded like a talking yardstick as he answered questions after questions about the measurements and blueprints he had made of the Borden house and its vicinity. Even the judges were bored. Then came lawyer Jennings' turn with Kieran. At the time you were making measurements of the closets on the lower floor of the Borden house, was your attention called particular to the size of the closet in the front hall? It was. Did you see at that time any experiment performed as to whether a person could or could not go in there and have the door completely shut? Jennings knew perfectly well what the answer would be. He himself had stepped into that closet and shut the door behind him. Finding that he fit, Jennings stepped out, put his assistant inside, and called Kieran's attention to the experiment. Even with the door slightly ajar, Kieran told the jury he had failed to see anyone standing inside. If a lawyer could hide in there, the jurors had no choice but to assume a murderer could too. Jennings had landed his first punch for the defense, and with one of the prosecution's own witnesses, nor was he finished. Upstairs, Kieran's assistant had lain down on the floor where Miss Borden was found. Kieran discovered he could not see any part of the man's body from Lizzie Borden's doorway, even though his assistant was so much taller than Miss Borden that his feet stuck out behind the end of the bed. Miss Brigham and Uncle Morris had performed an identical experiment with identical results, the jury later learned. The bed made it impossible to see the body even from the guest room doorway. Only when Kieran paused at the center of the certain step with his eyes level with the floor could he see anyone lying there. As soon as his head rose above the bottom of the bed, the body became undetectable. Knowles would follow with his star witness, Bridget Sullivan, just 26 years old, Irish. She had spent the last 7 years doing nothing more interesting than cooking other people's dinners, sweeping their floors, and washing their clothes. Under any other circumstance, no one would have taken the slightest notice of her life. Now, the mere mention of her name, the sight of her in a maroon dress, feathered hat, and black kid gloves, caused a sensation in the courtroom. No one knows the family better than its maid, and everyone, down to Lizzie Borden herself, wanted to hear what this girl, who had refused to set foot in the Borden house since the first day of the inquest, now had to say about them. Mr. Moody questioned her carefully, politely. There were no secrets or dark revelations to pry out of her. All he needed was a straightforward account of the morning of August 4th. As she had done at the inquest and preliminary hearings, Bridget delivered. She spoke so softly, yet her answers were firm. No one could or would give so many details about that morning. Bridget knew who had gotten up when, what they had eaten, where Mr. Borden had dumped his slop pail. It was Bridget who vouched for nearly every time the screen door was hooked and unhooked. Breakfast with the Bordens. Cold boiled mutton warmed over mutton broth, bread and butter, Johnny cake, sugar, cookies, bananas, pears, and coffee. People have been wrinkling their noses and cracking jokes at Andrew and Abby Borden's last breakfast for over a century. Even at a time when dishes like pie and pork steak were commonplace on the breakfast table, the Bordens' menu struck many as peculiar, particularly for a well-to-do household. A smile played about the lips of Miss Sullivan whenever any reference was made to the component parts of the meal served at the Borden house, wrote Fall River Herald on June 8th. She laughed at the mutton and cold mutton and mutton broth, just as others have laughed at the same thing. Lizzie laughed, too, at the mutton. One of the most enduring Borden myths is that rotting leftover mutton caused the family sickness before the murder. Impossible. The infamous mutton did not debut until Wednesday noon, the day after Mr. and Miss Borden endured a miserable night of vomiting. The culprit was more likely the fried swordfish they'd eaten for dinner and supper Tuesday. Aside from her headache, everything about the morning had been perfectly normal. Starting the fire, unlocking the door, taking in the milk, putting out the pan for the iceman, getting the breakfast. The Bordens did nothing out of the ordinary either. Mr. and Miss Borden sat down and breakfast with Mr. Morse by 7:15. Lizzie slept in. When they finished, they rang the bell and went into the sitting room. Bridget sat down in Mr. Borden's chair and had her own breakfast, then cleared away. Next thing she noted, Mr. Morse was leaving. Bridget saw him go and heard Mr. Borden invite him back to dinner. 5 minutes or so later, Bridget couldn't say for sure, Lizzie appeared in the kitchen. I asked her what she'd want for her breakfast, Bridget testified. She said she didn't want any breakfast, but she felt as if she should have something. She guessed she would have some coffee and cookies. Just then, Bridget's breakfast rebelled. Out she went to be sick in the yard. She could not say how long she stayed there, 10 or 15 minutes perhaps. By the time she returned to her sink full of dishes, Lizzie was gone. There was no sign of Mr. Borden either. Bridget finished her dishes and carried them into the dining room, where she found Miss Borden busy with the feather duster. She said she wanted the windows washed. I asked her how, and she said inside and outside both. They were awful dirty. Nearest Bridget could figure it was around 9 o'clock. That was the last time she saw Miss Borden alive. As Bridget headed out the screen door with her pail and brush, Lizzie appeared in the entry and asked Bridget if she was going to wash windows. Yes, Bridget said. You needn't lock the door. I will be out around here, but you can lock it if you want to. I can get the water in the barn. Lizzie did not hook the door behind her. Bridget went all the way around the opposite side of the house to begin with the sitting room windows. First she stopped and chatted over the fence with the neighbor's maid. Then, with her long-handled brush, she went her way around 3 sides of the house, going back and forth to the spigot in the barn about half a dozen times to refill her pail. In between the washing and the rinsing, she popped into the kitchen for a dipper to fling clean water into the soapy pans. During all that time, probably while Miss Borden was being murdered, she said nothing out of the ordinary in the yard, barn, or kitchen. She noticed no one on the other side of the sitting or dining room windows. Moody did not specifically ask whether she'd seen anyone through the parlor windows. In fact, Moody had never asked if she actually could see through any of the windows. Whether this was an intentional sleight of hand on Mr. Moody's part did not matter once Governor Robinson began his cross-examination. He was brilliant at it, the Rochester Democratic Chronicle noted, with his queer spectacles, which have only half a glass for each eye, poised at the end of his nose. He seems so fatherly, and he has such a friendly and sympathetic air that there is no withstanding him. But whenever he and witnesses are getting along swimmingly, let the witness look out. In 2 jerks, the ex-governor will make him tell what he does not want to. Often he did it by wording his questions as if he were thinking aloud. On the outside of the parlor, you say the blinds were closed when you went around there? Yes, Bridget. I know they were closed in the front part anyway, but you can't tell us all whether the parlor curtains or shutters on the inside were closed. I can't remember how they were. Then came the question he'd been intending to ask all along. Whether anybody was in that room, you can't tell. No, sir, I couldn't. He did it again with the dining room windows, chatting amicably about her height and position until he came to the pertinent point. Can't see in, can you? I can't see, Bridget admitted, rather as if she thought had not occurred to her before. Not unless someone stood right up against the pane, she guessed. Once inside, Bridget had washed just half of one sitting room window before she heard Mr. Borden's key rattling uselessly at the front door. She let Mr. Borden in, sputtering at the infernal bolts and locks, and returned to her work without another word. The last Bridget saw of Miss Mr. Borden. He was reading the paper in a rocking chair in the sitting room. As she finished up the dining room windows, Lizzie came in and set up the little ironing board on the table to press her hankies. "Maggie," Lizzie said, using her nickname for Bridget, "are you going out this afternoon?" "I don't know. I might and I might not. I don't feel very well." "If you go out, be sure and lock the door, for Miss Borden has gone out on a sick call, and I might go out too." "Miss Lizzie, who is sick?" "I don't know. She had a note this morning. It must be in town." There was still an hour yet before dinner. Bridget went up to her attic room and lay down. 3, maybe 4 minutes later, the City Hall clock tolled 11 times. No more than 15 minutes after that, Bridget said, the cry came up the stairs, "Maggie, come down!"